Precious the Dayanim, the Rabbanim, all those working in Avodas HaKodesh, Dayan Gali, thank you for your kind words. And thank you for your inspirational words. It's hard to follow up after such a topic, such a comprehensive, inspirational analysis of Yachad Ninatzeach. But there is so much to say about it because it is the issue of our day. I believe it's the issue of our time. It's no secret anymore now. It's come out through a lot of sources and in a lot of ways that October 7th, the horrific attack, the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust happened because our enemies sensed within us a period of machlokas, a division, a divide. They've been explicit and they've said, hostages who were returned shared that they heard from their tormentors that what motivated and what inspired them to strike October 7th when they did is because on October 6th, the world was describing that Israel was on the verge of a civil war, that the Jewish people were about to turn on each other. The debate over judicial reform in Eretz Yisrael, the fight between the right and the left, the religious and the not yet religious, it had reached such a low. The venom, the tension was so high that our enemies understood it. That's when we are the most vulnerable. That's when the time is to strike. We had a hostage speak in our shul. She described that she heard the horrific terrorist who was holding her captive was watching the news following the October 7th events and saw the way Klal Yisrael, Am Yisrael came together. In Israel, all those divisions and all that tension and all that hate and all those so strongly entrenched positions, they went to the side. Anyone who went to Israel in that time, I was privileged to go many, many times over the last 15 months, saw an Am Yisrael that woke up and that remembered what matters and what's important and what comes first and came together and put to the side those differences. And this member of Hamas commented, remarked that they never anticipated what the reaction would be. They attacked the way they did because they assumed that if indeed we were on the verge of a civil war, then this attack we would unravel. We'd come apart at the seams. We'd blame one another. We'd hold one another accountable. We'd point fingers. We'd abandon one another. And they'd be able to march all the way to Yerushalayim. They would continue from the south and from the north until they eliminated our people and took over Israel altogether. And boy, did they have a surprise. Boy, were they surprised. Because our enemy so grossly underestimated us. But it wasn't only our enemy that underestimated us. We underestimated ourselves. I don't know that any of us believed or knew if on October 6th, this august gathering, this conference met, and we said, in a week's time, Klal Yisrael is going to drop everything and come together. We'll be there for one another. We'll go to the ends of the earth to protect, to take care, to show up for one another. You'd say, impossible. Can't be. Can't be. And yet that's what happened. Sometimes it takes our enemies to bring us together. And they did. Sfas Emes makes a comment on the Haggadah, on V'hi She'amda, Shelo echad belvad amar Aleinu l'chaloseinu. Last night, a group of us, I mentioned the V'hi She'amda is anti-Semitism. That's the Aruch HaShulchan's Haggadah. We don't welcome anti-Semitism. We stand up and we fight it. But if there is a silver lining to it, it's that it reminds us who we are. V'hi, what is the thing? She'amar Aleinu. What is the thing? V'hi She'amda. What is the thing that stood for us? Is that Shebechol Davar Dor Amdim Aleinu L'chaloseinu. When the Jews are in danger of assimilating and disappearing, we can always count on the non-Jewish world to remind us who we are, to hold it against us. And I was mentioning last night, I think it's a moment to leverage, to take advantage of anti-Semitism at least, even while we fight it and seek to eliminate it, to take advantage of it, to tell our people, if they hate you and they want to kill you for being Jewish, lean in and look into and learn about why be Jewish. Let's take billboards, let's take advantage, let's invite and inspire the people who are living with the panic and the fear, the people who are covering up or hiding, people who are worried about what will be to be a Jew. Let's at least look into our Judaism. But the Sfas Emes has a different comment. And he says, Shelo echad bilvad amar aleinu l'chaloseinu You know what it is that threatens us in every generation? Shelo echad bilvad. That alone, not being echad, having machlokas, being divided, being at each other's throats, sitting in judgment of one another, marginalizing, looking down at, feeling superior to, being hypercritical of, shelo echad, being broken in pieces, not being united in one, shelo echad bilvad, that alone, amar aleinu l'chaloseinu. That alone threatens us. And we lived it, and we've seen it. On October 6th, we were lo echad. But by October 8th, we came together with tremendous achdus and unity, with a sense of nitzchios, am hanetzach ninatzeach, billboards and posters and bumper stickers all over Eretz Yisrael and beyond, calling on the am hanetzach, the people of eternity. We will win, we will prevail, we will triumph, because we will be together. Together. And those artificial lines and those divides that had kept us apart, different communities in Israel I don't even need to spell out for you, you know well. They dissipated. They disappeared for a time. Chesed that was done was mind-boggling. The love and the loyalty for one another, the care and concern for each other, despite different backgrounds and political positions and where we were from, the same groups that were shutting down minyanim on Yom Kippur, literally a few weeks later, were standing up and showing up and helping each other in unimaginable ways. It was a beautiful thing to see, and for those who were there, to even experience. But my dear friends, I'm incredibly worried and tremendously fearful that here we are 15 months later, and the achdus is already fraying. And instead of being October 8th and beyond, too many have gone back to October 6th, to that divide, to those differences, to that brokenness, to that judgment, to that criticism, to that superiority towards one another. That has always been and that will be our downfall, shelo echad bilvad. And the beauty of today, and I'm in awe, and I bring this energy back, and the challenge to the organizations in America, so many of whom are doing the same work, but doing it in their own silos, and doing it in their own spaces, and doing it without collaboration and coordination like you are today, to come together because Aleinu, it's on us. It's on us. And we're all in the same mission. We're all trying to accomplish the same goals. And the am hanetzach ninatzeach, we will win when we are invested in nitzchios, eternity and immortality, which is our mission and our cause, which is our calling card, to bring Klal Yisrael and Am Yisrael to a place of immortality and eternity. We're not trying to win for the here and now. This is not a dispute over territory or money or power. We're fighting for nitzchios, for netzach, for eternity. And it's only biyachad. It's only when we're echad and can overcome the instinct, what for too long was the default of shelo echad, to collaborate and cooperate, to work together, to learn from one another, to have respect even with our differences, which is what I want to talk to you about in the time that we have this morning. On Yom Kippur, we read about the Asara Harugei Malchus in the Slichos. On Tisha B'Av, we read the same story in the context of the Kinos. On Yom Kippur, it's about the Misas Tzadikim as a kapara. On Tisha B'Av, it takes the form of an elegy of a kina for the horrific loss of these non-contemporaries, the Gedolim of each of those generations murdered by the Romans. Why did they meet their demise in such a horrific way? Why were their lives taken? The Medrash Eicha, Gemara, tells us that the reason the Asara Harugei Malchus were killed so brutally, our Gedolim, our Tzadikim, how could it be? The Medrash tells us that the Roman emperor came across the story from our parashios of Yosef and his brothers, how they sold him into slavery, a crime that's punishable by death, a capital crime. And he notes that the brothers were never held accountable. There was never a trial for them. They were never punished for what they did. Yosef sort of glossed over it and he let it go and he made a calculation. It was more important to be together. A very important lesson, and one maybe we'll come back to. But the brothers were never held accountable, and he took it upon himself, says the Medrash, to do so. Obviously, this was much later and he couldn't hold the brothers themselves, The closest to it were the Gedolim of that time. And he brings them together and he holds them on trial. You all know the Medrash. I don't need to elaborate. We've read it so many times, too many times in Eila Ezkara and in the Slicha of Yom Kippur. But something about the story doesn't add up. And he puts them to death. Something about the story doesn't add up. When the curtain comes down in this week's Parsha Vayechi, Sefer Bereshis comes to a close, everybody's getting along. There's harmony, there's peace, there's love, there's achdus. The curtain comes down, there's kumbaya, everybody's together. It's a big kumsitz and a fabrengen, and everybody's enjoying. So what do you mean, years later, the Roman emperor is going to hold the brothers accountable? Because the brothers were never put to death, a capital crime that wasn't accounted for. It was done. It was finished. It was forgiven. Why are they punished, and why are we still reading their story of the Asara Harugei Malchus? And Rabbeinu Bechaya, and he's not the only one, maybe the most prominent one, who has a very, very startling answer. And he says, he notes that although the text tells us that Yosef reassured his brothers, he never fully forgave them. And the unity that they created was incredibly superficial. And you see that in this week's parsha, because the brothers after Yaakov dies say, you know, Yosef, I don't know if you know, but Dad told us to tell you, don't do anything even after he's gone. And wow, is that a punch in Yosef's face? Wow, what a realization that even though he thinks he finally broke through, and he's one of them, they're all together, they're brothers, what a horrific and harsh reminder he receives that there still isn't harmony, that the brothers are still afraid that he's going to take revenge and he's going to get even. And he realizes it's not all done. He never fully forgave them, says Rabbeinu Bechaya, because they never fully asked for forgiveness. And it's a topic for another time, an Elul Yom Kippur topic, about what real Slicha Mechila looks like. Not the superficial, gloss over, make everything look okay, sweep it under the carpet kind, but a genuine reconciliation and a genuine working out. But here we are all these years later, and we're still reading the Asara Harugei Malchus. Here we are all these years later, and we're still paying the price for this tension, enmity between the brothers, because it was never resolved and it was never worked out. It was superficially glossed over. It was swept under a carpet. They cooperated. They cooperated for the day, for a conference, but when it was over, when the cameras were off, when the mic was shut down, what was left of that collaboration and cooperation? Was it skin deep? Was it superficial? Was it for everyone else to see? Was it for Yaakov? Or was it genuine? Was it real? Was it true? Was it authentic? Was it practiced day in and day out? In last week's Parsha, Yosef and Binyamin are reunited. And Rashi quotes the Medrash that Yosef was crying, Binyamin was crying, they collapsed on each other's shoulder in a very emotional moment. They're crying together. And why are they crying? Rashi quotes the Chazal. They're crying. Binyamin cried for the destruction of the Mishkan housed in the territory of Yosef, and Yosef's crying for the Batei Mikdash that will be housed in the territory of Binyamin. They're crying. It's a very Jewish moment, which should be incredibly happy and joyous and festive. Instead, is filled with drama and melodrama and tears and crying and sadness. Like we have a way of turning, which should be even like somebody has to make that comment or say that thing or bring everything down. What do we have to be brought down? Yosef, Binyamin, just lean into the moment. Just be present. Just experience this special reunion, this reconciliation. Finally, after all this time, you have to fashter it by talking about things that don't even exist yet. You're crying over a Mishkan that isn't even built. You're crying over a Batei Mikdash that don't even yet exist. All to be able to lose the moment? What are they crying about? And the first Majitzer Rebbe in his Divrei Yisrael Taub, and Sfas Emes says the same thing. They're not crying about the future, and they're not crying about something that hasn't yet happened. They're crying about what brought them to that moment and that it hadn't yet fully solved. Yosef and Binyamin, the only two sons of both Yaakov and Rachel, embraced and cried, and it were bittersweet tears, because they understood that while they were reunited, sharing the same father and mother, they recognized that what had kept them apart and separated and estranged, that sinas chinam was not yet solved. Yes, on the surface they glossed it over. Yes, in a performative way they made it look like they were all getting together. But that sinas chinam that had kept them apart and left them estranged, the sinas chinam was not solved. It wasn't solved that led to the moment. It wasn't solved still at that moment. And for generations, it would be yet to be solved. So much so there would be a destruction of a Mishkan and of a Beis HaMikdash. Right then they decided, says the Machatzor, to practice the only antidote and the only response to sinas chinam, which is avas chinam. That's why they hugged. That's why they cried out each other's soldier. They were demonstrating, both for the future but also in that moment for the present, the antidote. They were practicing the response to sinas chinam. It's for two brothers to hug and to cry on each other's shoulders. They mourn not only for the loss in their territory. Rashi Chazal is very meduyak. They didn't cry because I'm going to have a Mishkan in Shiloh that I'm going to lose, and because I'm going to have Batei Mikdash in my Chelek that I'm going to lose. For whom did they cry? They each cried for the other. That's Avas Chinam. That's the antidote to sinas chinam. In that moment, they weren't simply fashtering the simcha. They were trying to fix it. They were trying to model it. They were trying to demonstrate it. And it's exactly what we need to do, is to not only performatively cooperate or get along, not only to have one day of Aleinu, but each and every day. Even if we're not technically collaborating with all of our logos on a particular program, it means, even if we're not together, to cry for one another, to feel, to be nosei ba'olim chavero, to lift the other's burden so it gets a little bit lighter for them. One of the memches Kinyane HaTorah, to be b'nei Torah, b'nos Torah, to be in avodas HaKodesh is to be nosei ba'olim chavero, and chavero kol Yisrael. What it means to have a conference like this is that we're in it together, we're colleagues. This is a chevra, we are chaverim, and we need to be nosei ba'ol with one another, to lift that burden, to make it lighter for the other. We need to do it because it's the antidote, it's the fix, it's the response. To love, to kiss, to embrace, to hug, even to cry for one another. But we need to do it also because we need to model it for the very people we're trying to impact. It's not only our enemy who knows to strike and who's turned off when they see us apart. It's the very people that we're trying to draw close and upon whom we're trying to have this impact. There is nothing that turns people off more than seeing religious Jews fighting with one another, judging one another, hypercritical of one another. The greatest chalent and the greatest potato kugel in the world, the nicest tish, the biggest Shabbos experience, all the Kiruv programs combined cannot make up for a moment that person hears or perceives that organizations, that religious Jews sit in judgment of one another, don't get along with one another, are at each other's throats, practice a sinna towards each other. We need to live for ourselves, but we need to model for others because it's part of the work that we do to draw them close, is to show them Avas Yisrael, the love of a fellow Jew, that we have so much more in common than that separates us, that we are bound by a history and by a destiny, that only biyachad ninatseach, that to overcome those enemies who strike when we are weak, and we are weak when we are divided. Haman years later sees the same thing. The same thing that Hamas just saw on October 6th that made them strike October 7th. Hen am mifuzar umufurad bein ha'amim. Yeshno am echad, says the Gemara Megillah. Yoshno am echad. They're sleeping. They're fast asleep. They're divided. They're at each other's throats. They're killing each other. They're focused on what's unimportant instead of what matters. They're seeing their differences instead of their commonalities. They're mifuzar umufurad. They're scattered and they're spread out. Shelo echad. They're not one. They can't cooperate or collaborate. They don't love. They don't lift each other up. They're not crying on each other's shoulders for each other, not for themselves. Haman strikes for the same reason. He chooses that inauspicious moment. That Hamas is the same thing that traces itself all the way back to the Asarei Harugei Malchus that we are still crying for and that we're going to fast about this Friday. Asara B'Teves. What does Asara B'Teves commemorate? So the Navi itself tells us Nebuchadnezzar laid siege, the beginning of that siege that lasted 2.5 years, that was the beginning of the end of that Beis HaMikdash that Yosef and Binyamin were already crying over. We're commemorating the beginning of the end, the Churban, the Siluk HaShechina, HaKadosh Baruch Hu withdrew. You know why, by the way? Because, I don't know about you, Baruch Hashem, we have many children. I never want to be with them more than when they're getting along, and I never want to run out of the room faster than when they're fighting with each other and at each other's throats. I don't even want to host them. If you want to kill each other, go find somewhere else. In our house, if you want to be with us, if you want our generosity, everyone get along. HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels the exact same way. Sinas chinam, you can't get along, you can't figure it out, you can't cooperate and collaborate, you can't focus on what you have in common. Avinu Sheba Shemayim, as our Tati, as our father, he says, I'm out of here. Sila Kashchina, he withdrew the Shechina, the result was Churban. And so this Friday, the only one that could fall out on an Erev Shabbos, we're going to fast. And every woman will find out Friday night what time shul really ends. As all the memes will come out this Thursday and Friday, Zrizin Magdim and the memes. So I got it in early. But the Beis Yishai, Rav Shlomo Fisher Zatzal, his Beis Yishai is a big chiddush. He's a Meradik chiddush, and he writes there that he doesn't have a makor, but he believes. You know what date on the calendar Asar B'Teves? What happened on the calendar on Asar B'Teves that commemorate? What happened in our Torah on that day that we're still fasting for these years later? He writes in his Beis Yishai, that was the day of Mechiras Yosef. Asar B'Teves, this Friday, Klal Yisrael around the world will fast to try to atone and fix and repair the damage that was done and is still being done because of Mechiras Yosef, because of that sale, because of that tension, because of that divide, because of that enmity, because of that judgment, because they couldn't figure it out, they couldn't get along. Lo yachlu dabro lishalom. Lo yachlu dabro lishalom. What does that mean? It's a very clumsy expression. If you look at any translation of a Chumash, it struggles to translate the words Lo yachlo dabro lishalom. What does it even mean? Some say it means the brothers couldn't even accept that Yosef was trying to make shalom. Lo yachlu dabro, they couldn't even accept. Tiferes Yehonos from Yonis and Eibshit says Lo yachlu dabro lishalom means they couldn't even give each other a shalom aleichem. You know those people? When you're planning your simcha, you can't put them at the same table. Nebuch, you could tear kriya, it's so sad. When you're planning your simcha, you have to figure out, they need to be they can't be at the same table. Because they don't even give each other a shalom aleichem. They can't even be in the same shul, sit in the same row. They can't even walk by each other and say hello to one another. It is so bad. They are so apart, so divided. There is such machlokas. Lo yachlu dabro l'shalom. They can't even give a shalom aleichem. Says Tiferes Yonos, and it means that's what happened with Yosef and his brothers, that sin ran so deep. Forget sitting at a conference together, collaborating or working together. They couldn't even overlap. They couldn't even pass ways. They couldn't even give a shalom aleichem. They couldn't even say hello. They couldn't even say hello to one another. And that resulted in the mechira. That resulted in Yosef being sold. Something Yosef later interpreted and understood to mean that it was from Hashem, and that was for Yosef to choose to see it for himself. But we continue to suffer. The sinas chinam that is going on today, that October 8th we thought was gone forever, and here we are coming up on Asar B'Teves, Tafshin Pei, and it's back. We have to fast again. Hopefully there'll be a Beis Hamikdash, we'll be in Yerushalayim by Friday, and there'll be no fast. But if we find ourselves fasting again, it is only because we haven't found a solution. We're still having very superficial, very one-day conference, very performative for the camera, very superficial achdus. To get money from our funders, to show the world that we care, also to pick up a few nuggets from one another. But that's not what's going to solve the problem. It's a true Avas Yisrael. It's crying on each other's shoulders. It's crying for each other. It's Yachad Ninatzeach. It's feeling forever together is the only thing that's going to solve this problem, that's going to get us to go where we need to go. Solution is to be makir, to see the good in one another. That even though we have important differences, and we're allowed to have those differences, and those differences are wonderful. As Dayan Geli Shlita said, we have 12 shvatim, and 12 entrances to the Beis HaMikdash, the Navi tells us. And we'll get back to it in a moment. We have different drachim. And no one is trying to erase or make invisible those differences. And no one is trying to make anyone conform to the other. There are wonderful organizations and wonderful individuals who have hashkafas, who have a derech, who've discovered their path in avodas Hashem and in serving the klal. And to be biyachad, to be ba'achdus, doesn't mean to make it disappear. It means b'chol zos, to cooperate and to get along. You know, the tagline, our logo in our shul, Ki ish echad b'lev echad, as the Dayan mentioned. Vayichan sham Yisrael neged ahar. Ki ish echad b'lev echad was an interesting halacha question that came up because it's on our logo. Can any of our literature or flyers be brought into a bathroom? It just says Ki ish echad b'lev echad. We have a mat to wipe your feet when you come in, and the logo was printed on it. Someone objected, how am I going to wipe my feet on Ki ish echad b'lev echad? I looked into the sugya, interesting halachic shaila, if something's been used as a pitgan, not as a pasuk, they're heterim, it's not shemos. A separate, interesting halachic question. Ki ish echad b'lev echad. But the other language around our logo, the branding and marketing that we do, because we're trying to very subtly drive it home to ourselves, to our members, to our community, is valuing diversity and celebrating unity. Valuing diversity and celebrating unity. We once hosted Rabbi Steinsaltz, Zatzal. I'll never forget, it was in a person's home, he was speaking, and he was making himself a cup of coffee, the little coffee station that was set up beforehand, and such a brilliant man, and humble man. And he was having a casual conversation. He said, Rabbi, tell me about your shul. What makes it special? What makes it stand out? Ooh, that's my favorite question. So I jumped into my whole pitch. Our diversity and our unity and our differences, Ashkenazim and Sfardim and young and old and left wing and right wing, and from a shtreimel to someone driving to shul and all sitting together. And I drove into my whole thing. And I'm valuing diversity, celebrating unity. I gave him my whole pitch, our slogan, our logo. He said, valuing diversity, celebrating unity, it's redundant. There's no chiddush. I said, what do you mean? So only the way Rabbi Steinsaltz could casually throw this out. He said, if you have unity, obviously you have diversity. If you didn't have diversity, you wouldn't have unity, you'd have uniformity. Oh. Oh. To have unity, you have to have diversity. Implicit in biyachad is that we're different. There's different organizations represented here. There are different people represented here. Just like we look different, our deos are different, which is a beautiful pshat, by the way. What does it mean, just like our appearance? Partzefeim, just like our appearance, our face is different, so too our deos are different. What does one thing have to do with the other? I once saw, you never see someone go over to someone else and get angry because of the way the other person looks. I'm angry at you because of your facial features. I'm angry at you because of the color of your hair. I'm angry at you because of your height. Elamai, the other party, you realize that's the way they were born. That's how they were designed. That's the way they were created. Similarly, our deos are not shava. If another person thinks differently, has a different approach, of course within boundaries we're talking, within a framework of Torah, but our deos, we were also designed differently, and we also come differently, and we also think differently. In the same way we make space and entitle people to look different, or dress different, or have different appearance or facial features, similarly we should allow them and make space for them to also think different and be different. That's the only way we have Avos Yisrael. It's the only way that we can have peace. It's a wonderful sefer, set of Sfarim. Menachem ben Zion Zaks. He was a Rav in Chicago. He was a son-in-law of Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, of the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, of the Har Tzvi. It's a great Talmud Chacham, Yerushalmi, who moved to Chicago. And there's many Sfarim. Menachem Tzion, he has on Chumash, on Yerach Lamodim, he has on Pirkei Avos. It's beautiful, beautiful Sfarim. And he writes there, he says on the bracha found at the end of several Masechtas, that there's no kli machzik bracha like shalom. There's no kli that can hold bracha like shalom. If we want shefa bracha, we want bracha in our lives, for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, we have to be devoted, we have to be committed to shalom, to peace. We have to be committed to peace, to shalom. So he says, when do we wish ourselves that bracha? At the end of every Amidah, 3 times a day, what do? We take 3 steps backward. If you want shalom, the first thing you have to do, take 3 steps backward, is make space for others. If you are going to be all-encompassing, and you're going to make other people conform, and you're going to overpower, and you're going to demand everyone look and dress and be exactly like you, then you'll never have shalom, you'll have machlokas. You want shalom, the first thing you have to do is take 3 steps backward. And then what do? We bow to the left and to the right. We look at the people to the left of us and right of us religiously and politically, and we bow and we recognize, I don't agree with you. I don't worship like you. I don't live like you. I don't dress like you. I don't vote like you. I'm different than you. But I bow. I recognize your right to be different. If we want shalom, osa shalom b'mramav, we only say shalom, Kadosh Baruch Hu will give us shalom when we first take those 3 steps back, when we make the space for people to be different. When we look to the left and the right, organizations to the left and the right, and people within organizations to the left and the right, and we make space and we allow those who are Shomrei Torah and Mitzvos and Yirei Shemayim, but express it like a different shevet under a different degel, and we make space for them. We've taken some steps back. We allow them to be. We make space for them, safe space for them. We look to the left and to the right. Only then can we have shalom. If we have machlokas sinis Yisrael shalo echad, amar aleinu l'chalaseinu. All the money going into these organizations and all the mesiras nefesh of your lives that you could have been doing something else much more profitable will get nowhere if we don't have shalom, if we have machlokas. The Shlah says something astounding. The Shlah, and he brings Zariah's proof to it, he points out that there was only one day that the man didn't fall in the midbar. Chet Egel, the man still fell. We cheated on Hashem. On our honeymoon, after Har Sinai, infidelity with the Ribono Shel Olam, and the man still fell. Which day did the man not fall? Adas Korach, the machlokas with Korach, says the Shlah. And the Shlah has a yesod. And he says, you want Parnasa? This is the school for Parnasa. Nobody's made famous yet. Anyone's welcome to. I'm not even asking for royalties. You can share the Shlah. You want a school for Parnasa? The school for Parnasa, for the man to fall, is to be devoted and committed to Shalom as a principal primary value. Where there's machlokas, there's no Parnasa. Where there's machlokas, there's no bracha. Where there's machlokas, there's no Shalom. The man fell, Cheta Egel. The man fell, all the other times, Masonanim, all the other times we came up short, we complained, we got it wrong. Even when we cheated on Hashem with the Cheta Egel, the man fell. One day it didn't fall, says the Shlah. Korach, machlokas. If you want bracha, you want shalom, want parnasa, then there has to be avas Yisrael. We have to hug one another like Yosef and Binyamin. We have to cry on each other's shoulder for the other person. Help the other organization. Raise money for them. Introduce them to a donor. Give them a great idea. Refer somebody who you think would benefit more from them. Cry on their shoulder. Lift their ol. Demonstrate that achdus, and more people will flood and flock and run to want to embrace Torah and mitzvos. Parnasa, shalom, bracha can only fall when there's a sense of achdus, of Abbas Yisrael. We don't have to be the same, but we have to take those steps back to make room for the others. Our collaboration, our unity, our partnership can't be for one day, for one conference. It has to be each and every day part of the core and central to who we are and how we live. Yosef has one instruction to his brothers when they leave last week. He says, Ma'aru va'alu, quickly go up and get father and bring him down. And altir gezu badarach. Altir gezu badarach. Taka, I was in New York on the way here. I went for a chasna before coming here from New York. And there's a friend I have who likes to listen to the shiurim, who was driving me. He was kind enough to pick me up. And he was so lost in talking about a Dvar Torah I had given that we almost missed the exit from the highway. I said, Altir gezu badarach. It's Mamash Rashi. Yosef says, quickly, I've been away 22 years is more than enough. I want to see my father. Hurry up, get him down here. Don't get orangutan and learning so much that you're going to be distracted from missing the exit. Go get Tati and bring him down. That's one pshat, Altir gezu badarach. But others say something so yisodistic. You know what Yosef was telling them? Al tirgezu miloshen rogas broiges badarach on the derech. Do you know how this all started? Do you know what happened? Because we're on a different derech, Yehuda and Yosef. Because Yosef says, I wasn't like you, and you couldn't take it, you couldn't tolerate it, you threw me in a pit, you sold me into slavery because I was on a different derech. So you're going to be tempted on the way out of here to point fingers, to blame, to criticize, to judge. Whose fault was it? I said, bring him home. I said, save him. I said, we'll work it out. It's your fault. It was your idea. Your derech is wrong. Al tirgezu badarach. Don't be broiges because somebody's on another derech. That's how we got into this mess. And the only way we're going to get out of it is Avas Yisrael, is let people have another derech. Let them have their other way. How can you let somebody have another derech? Another derech. You know, the Medrash says, by the way, if you want to picture this image quite literally, we picture Kriyas Yamsuf as if the Yamsuf split in two, but the Medrash tells us that's not what happened. The Shvatim each walked in their own lane. It was a super highway, the Yamsuf, and the walls of water formed that there were 12 lanes. We can have our own derech. We can walk in our own lane. We can walk in our own lane. You're allowed to visit someone else's lane too, but we can walk in our own lane. We can have our own home address. But al tirgezu b'derech, don't be broiges because someone's on another derech, because they believe they live or they're following in the darchei haTorah, in the derech Hashem, in the shiftei ka. Al tirgezu b'derech. Recognize and respect that there's good and there's virtue and there's merit and there's beauty, even in the other organization, even in their derech, even in other people and colleagues, even in their lifestyle. Rabbi Meir Zilberberg, I just saw in a sefer, he says, at the root of it all was, even when they come down, heim lo hikiruhu, to not be makir, to not see the good in another. He wasn't recognizable to them, they didn't recognize him. The Torah emphasizes to fail to recognize, to see the good. You have to search, you have to look. For some it's right on the surface and it's easy to find, and others you need a magnifying glass. For others you need a telescope. But there's good. There's a tzelem Elokim in each of us. To be makir, to look and to find and to search for that good. The Amaras Taharos, the Rachmes Rivka, points out that when Yaakov sends Yosef to go look for his brothers, he says, "Vayomer lo lech na re'eh shlom achecha ve'shlom hatzon v'hashiveni davar." Go and look at shlom achecha and shlom hatzon and bring me back davar. Vayishlacheu me'emech Hebron vayevosh Shechem. And the simple understanding was, no, your brothers are gone a long time. They said they'd be home from now. Go check on them, see how they're doing. Bring them some lunch, make them a picnic. Go see what's happening. Which, by the way, some used to explain why for 22 years, or a good part of them, Yosef didn't even try to get in touch with his father. Because the way it all began was his father sending him to check on the brothers. He might have thought, maybe my father was in on this. And it's only when Yehuda says, our father is distraught and inconsolable, and he's already lost one son, that Yosef realizes Yaakov was not in on it. But it began because Yaakov says, no, go check on them. And the simple taich is, go see how they're doing. They haven't been back. They're supposed to be home by now. Go bring them lunch. But says the Rachmes Rivka, look a little bit more carefully and you'll see what Yaakov was telling Yosef. Yosef had brought Dibara. What's Dibara? He was a snitch. He kept tattletaling. He kept pointing out the faults and the failures, the shortcomings of his brothers. He didn't get the memo. I don't know if they have the saying here, but snitches get stitches. You can't snitch. Another lesson as a parent. Even when your child's done something wrong, but when their sibling tells on them, that's a no-no. It's got to be loyalty. It's an unwritten rule of sibling. It's got to be loyalty. Snitches get stitches. You can't turn anyone in, and Yosef keeps coming in and tattling. And why does he keep tattling? Because he doesn't see what's right about his brothers. He doesn't see what's whole about his brothers. He doesn't see what he has in common with his brothers. He brings the diba ra, he brings a davar of ra. He sees what's wrong, the failure, the shortcoming, the difference. So his father turns to him and he says, Re'ei es shlom achecha. The word shlom is shalem. Says Yaakov, Yosef, do me a favor. Go out and try something different. Instead of looking for what's wrong, instead of poking the hole, instead of offering the criticism, instead of seeing the brokenness, instead of seeing what's missing, Re'ei, go look for what is shalem among achecha. And hashiveni davar. Instead of dibur ra'a, hashiveni davar, come back, Yosef, let's try something. Come back and bring me an experiment of try to say something nice. Try to look for something shalem, something whole, something working, something that you have in common. The last couple American presidential debates, last couple presidential cycles, the moderators asked a question. It was entertaining, I don't know, effective, and it threw off the candidates. The last question of the debate was, can you say a compliment, say something nice about your opponent? Which they struggled with. It was pretty entertaining to see what they found. It'd be an interesting session in this conference for each organization to have to highlight what it admires and loves and has learned from the other organization. Re'ei shlom achecha. What's shalem among achecha? What's there to learn or admire or look up to or take away from? What's something that one has in common with the other? Maybe that happens, or maybe it doesn't need to happen because it's so obvious. I don't mean to presume at all. But it's something that we can all practice so much more. So Asar B'Teves, we don't have to be Mesakin and Mechaper for the sale of Yosef this coming Friday. Hashiveni Davar, we need a lot more of Hashiveni Davar to bring back a good word about somebody else. a good referral to another organization, a good referral of a donor, which will never take away from us. It'll bring us more shefa bracha, because the man will rain down. The more Avas Yisrael, the more Achdus, the more Nosei Ba'ol that we practice. You send a donor to another organization who you think is doing a project that will speak to them, I promise you, I practically guarantee you, you'll see shefa bracha. The man, the parnasa will fall for you. Hashiveni davar, to bring back a davar to one another. To have an ayin tov, to see what's good, what's right, what's shalom in the other. Not what's broken, not what's missing, not what's there. Al tirgezu b'derech, to not be broiges because someone else has a different derech, but to be biyachad, and only then, because we can be ninatseach, only then will we come together. To recognize even within ourselves, not only we have what to learn and cooperate from one another, but we ourselves should be diverse and broad and learn and incorporate into what we're doing, what we see from others. It's another aspect of what we try to do in our community that I think and I hope makes it special, far from unique. I hope it spreads and becomes more popular, is to bring an approach and an attitude of this diversity and this unity. Diversity, not divisiveness, and unity, not uniformity. We're not trying to make people be uniform. You don't have to conform, dress alike, vote alike, look alike, daven the same nusach. We have in our shul every Shabbos morning 8 minyanim. Each minyan is different. I like to say each minyan has its own character and cast of characters. Each minyan has its own style kiddush. Each minyan is unique, and each minyan has its own nusach. We're not at 12 shvatim yet. We're at 8. Could always continue to look to grow. But the beauty is that we're on one campus and one kehila and one set of rabbanim. And we have one history of our community, and we're fighting towards one destiny, and we're trying to live biyachad, to mourn and to grieve and to cry together after on October 7th or communal losses, to celebrate successes together, and to recognize that none of us have a monopoly on the emes, on the truth. Al tirgezu b'derech, that the harbe dracham lamakom, that the shvatim, Yechezkel tells us there were 12 gates to the Beis HaMikdash. And Rav Chaim Vital in his Pri Etz Chaim and Shara Tefillah says that correspondingly each tribe, each shevet had their own nusach HaTefillah, their own liturgy, and their own gate through which the tefillos ascend and penetrate and enter on high. And almost 200 years later, the Maggid of Mizrich adds in Maggid Dvar of Yaakov that if somebody doesn't know his or her shevet, you don't know your tribe, there's a 13th gate. And he suggested when it comes to davening, that's the Nusach Hari. And Nusach Hari is what the Maggid called the Shar HaKolel. And my personal philosophy, how I try to live my life, and I think it filters to our Kehila, is a Shar HaKolel approach to life. We're living in a different time thanks to technology and how global the world is. Once upon a time, a person had their shtetl, their Rav, their Rosh Hashiva, their Rebbe, and their shtetl had their nusach and their minhagim and their shevet and their shar. And the world, though, is much more open and much more available and much more accessible to listen to Torah from all over and to learn Torah from all over and to be exposed to Torah from all over and to be enriched by those differences. It's a terrible, terrible thing to tolerate diversity. People usually put those expressions, those words together. We tolerate diversity. We're a very tolerant community. We're a very tolerant organization. We're very tolerant people. The Sri De'esh, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg has an essay, Esachai Anochi Mevakesh, where we'll talk about it later today, when he meets the Ish, the Malach, he's looking for his brothers. He says, what are you looking for? He says, Esachai Anochi Mevakesh. And there Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg writes, he says, Chalila, a Jew should tolerate a fellow Jew. Chalila should never be the language that we use. You tolerate slow Wi-Fi. He doesn't say that. You tolerate the side effects of a medication. You tolerate a bad rash. You tolerate things that you wish weren't there but you could live with. You don't tolerate a fellow Jew, you love a fellow Jew. He's writing to Reform and Conservative. He says, don't tolerate me and I won't tolerate you. Avas Yisrael, we need to love one another. We need to love one another. We need to find what we have in common with one another. We need to see not only the bris Sinai, but the bris Avos. How much we have in common, our history and our destiny. We don't tolerate one another. We love one another. We love one another. And so that Shar HaKolal that says, I can take a little from here and a little from here, and I'm not threatened by it, I'm enhanced by it, and I don't have to abandon my home base. My home base. David Lichtenstein, the host of Headlines podcast, is a Meredith Talmid Chacham, a fascinating individual, and he's a friend of mine. He once said to me, his mashal for this, which I really appreciated. He has a driver. He has his own driver. So his driver was a former policeman, New York City policeman. He's his driver / security. So his son once was going on a shidduch date, had to go to Toronto, and he asked the driver, he didn't want it to fly for whatever reason, he wanted to make sure he'd be able to get back. He asked the driver, I need you to take my son. So the driver said, I can't. So what do you mean you can't? He said, I don't have a passport. He said, you don't have a passport? You're 60-something years old. You're a mature man. You're intelligent, smart. You were a member of the police force. What do you mean you don't have a passport? He said, I don't have a passport. I never left the country. I've never left America. And he couldn't believe it. What do you mean you don't have a passport? And the nimshal is, we have a home base. Our hashkafa, our shar, our shevet, that's our home base. Wherever you're most comfortable, Litvish, Hasidish, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, whatever a person's home base, that's our home base, our home hashkafa. But don't be afraid to have a passport and travel. And what happens when you have a passport and you travel? And you check out, you've been to Italy, you've been to Switzerland, you've been to London, you've been to America, you've been wherever you're going, wherever you're traveling. Lav davka, are you moving there? And lav davka, are you going to change your accent? Lav davka, are you going to learn that language? Lav davka, are you going to embrace the whole lifestyle? But epis, maybe you're going to come home with something. Maybe you brought something you're going to put on a shelf. Maybe you picked up something which was a good minhag. Maybe you learned something that's going to enrich your life. Have a home base. But the Torah is not afraid for us to have a passport and to travel. Yaakov Avinu is described by the Torah as an Ish Tam Yoshev. Doesn't say Ohel. He's an Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. Pavarsky Zatzal and others say, why was he Yoshev Ohalim? Because Chazal tell us that a person who's only lomed in one base medrash won't be Roa Siman Bracha. A person who's so locked in that they're not willing to be exposed to other drachim, to other ways, to be enriched and complemented, to have a passport, to travel in the Yam of Torah, that person will not see a Siman Bracha. Yaakov, the quintessential Masmid, didn't sit in one tent. He wasn't Yoshev Ohel. He was Yoshev Ohalim. He was Yoshev Ohalim. We have nothing to be afraid of. To learn from each other, to cooperate together, to draw from each other, to admire and compliment. Yachad, Natzayach. If we want to be the people of Nitzchias, if we want to accomplish Netzach, if we want eternity and immortality, which is why we're doing and in what we're in, as I said, and I say this with admiration and gratitude. Gratitude, I don't know who I am, I don't want to be presumptuous to speak on behalf of Klal Yisrael, the Ribbon Shalom, but the Hakaras HaTov to the people in this room, to those who are working in Avodas HaKlal, Avodas HaKodesh, the Mesiras Nefesh is unbelievable. And there's not a doubt in my mind that every one of you and everyone in this room could be making more money and have less stress and aggravation doing something else. And the only driver, the only reason you're doing this is Netzach, is Nitzchias, for a taste of immortality, to shape eternity. But the only way to get there is biyachad. Shalo achad amar aleinu l'chal oseinu. When we're broken, we fast on a Asara B'Tevis, a sale of a Yosef. Lo yichlu dabro l'shalom, we can't even give a shalom aleichem. When there's a very superficial cooperation and collaboration, we still have to read Asara Hurugei Marchos and Arzei HaLevanon. We still have to read Eila Ezkara, because it was only on the surface, it wasn't deep. So this year, let's take it deeper. Let's go deeper with the Avas Yisrael. Aleinu. My challenge and charge to you is don't just be together for one day a year. Aleinu, it's on us not to have a conference one day a year, but to collaborate and communicate, to hug, to cry on each other's shoulder, to care for the other, to refer and to help and to support and to celebrate the success of the other, to have a passport and to travel into each other's organizations, to learn, to draw, to extract the best, and to become better for it and because of it. We're in this for Netzach. And the only way that we'll be Netzach is if we will be biyachad. So let's not allow ourselves to become October 9th Jews. October 6th, we're on the verge of a civil war. By October 8th, we had an achdus I never experienced in my life. I came back on fire. I was in Eretz Yisrael shortly after October 7th and went 6 times since. And army bases and highway junctions and intersections where incredible stations have been set up, and billboards, and just Am Yisrael. What you felt, what you were together with, the connection, the achdus, mind-boggling. Who was tying tzitzis for each other? Everything that's happened this past year, we so quickly forget. But we can't allow it to be forgotten. We can't allow it to stop. And everything comes from the top. And so if we want to go and continue that October 8th achdus, we can't allow October 9th to have gone back to that sinah. That's what our enemies know. From Haman to Hamas, they know they can strike us when we're mefuzar and mefurad. Aleinu, it's on us. It's on us. Avas Yisrael, if we want the Shefa Bracha to fall like the man. It's on us, not one day a year, but to go deeper. Not like the brothers in Yosef, who the curtain came down and it was very superficial. The day was over, they got along, they learned a little something, they noshed a bit, and they moved on. Chaver, let's take it deeper this year. Let's do more together than we ever have before. Let's practice the greater Avas Yisrael. Let's demonstrate to all the people whose lives we're trying to change that we're changing ourselves to be different. And Amir Hashem, this Friday we won't be fasting in London and Boca, but we'll be together in Yerushalayim. Thank you so much.